Welcome to Understanding the Bible, the story of a book with Greg Salyer. In this final lecture, we'll look at some settled issues and neglected questions as we reflect on our understanding of the Bible, the story of a book. So, the Bible is the most cited and least read book in history. What does this mean? It means primarily, I think, that the Bible is not a book, it's an artifact. It's an artifact in the sense that it has a material reality that we use, a Bible on a shelf, a Bible at a swearing in, a Bible at a wedding, but also the content of the Bible is as an artifact. So, for example, the wedding, um, you're reading from, you may have a reading from 1 Corinthians 13 where St. Paul is writing about love. It's not romantic love that he's writing about. It is communal love, the love that fellow Christians have for each other. But that's okay. We also play Every Breath You Take at weddings, which is a stalker song. It too has become an artifact, right? So it has, by artifact, I mean both the material aspect of the artifact, but also the linguistic aspect. And that's how you can have the most cited and least read book in history. It also means that as long as the general public is biblically illiterate, those with nefarious goals will be able to use it as a tool of power. And I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on this. I think it's evident. And I hope it's even more evident now that you've become more biblically literate as a result of this course. We read at the beginning statements that people think are in the Bible that aren't. And we read some statements that are in the Bible that shock people when you tell them it is in the Bible. So once you have that situation, you are ripe for abuse by people who are wedded to power rather than truth, goodness, or beauty, especially compassion. And you can use it as a tool of power in less malignant ways, but often, of course, you can use it as a weapon to really hurt people. You can use it as a tool of power to, hold a Bible or say Bible verses. There's a senator in Florida who apparently tweets Bible verses in relation to contemporary events. Okay, that's using it as a tool of power, but it can also be used as a weapon. It can be used to really hurt people, really hurt their feelings, but also hurt their livelihood, their well being. I remember growing up, as you know, in a Baptist church, and I was going to a church, and one day the pianist organist was not there, and I asked where she was. Now I don't know, I'm 17, 18. I asked where she was, and they said she's not allowed to play the piano anymore. And I said, why? And they said, well, she got divorced. So she was removed from that position. And the justification was Jesus' statements on divorce, where Jesus says, Jesus says you have to stay married no matter what, and you cannot get remarried. So they used it as a weapon to hurt this poor woman. Obviously, it means that biblical illiteracy is the rule, not the exception. And in fact, you're now one of the smallest percentages of people in the world. I don't know what it would be. It'd be less than 1%, I think, of people who understand the Bible, how it came to be, its mediums, its messages, its construction, etc. And yeah, and what does that mean? It means so much is lost. So much is lost, not just in terms of the darker underbelly of the Bible, of which there's plenty, the violence that is not only described but divinely inspired in the Bible, the bigotry, the prejudice, um, the the various issues that you know of. That is lost. We don't get to see that, and we should. We also miss the beauty of the Bible. So, the Bible is one of the most amazing sacred texts in the world, parts of it. And in being biblically illiterate, we miss the beauty, such as the book of Job, which is one of the most beautiful texts in the world, regardless of its religious status or sacred status. Just as a piece of literature, it's it's the singular most powerful text on suffering, most challenging text on suffering that I have ever read, and I've read most of the major works of literature from around the world. It addresses suffering in a unique, powerful way, raw, very raw, but also some of the most beautiful poetry in the world. And I encourage you to read that book, by the way. The Bible does not exist. What does this mean? Well, it mitigates absolute claims if you understand it. Listen to some sermons from from Protestants and homilies from priests, and you'll get these absolute claims for the Bible, which are completely unwarranted because it doesn't exist. And so, honestly, I don't think anything should have absolute status because we're human and all things flow, as Heraclitus said. So, understanding that the Bible does not exist really undercuts these absolutist claims. It can mean a prompt for biblical literacy, and the best evidence for that is you in this class, engaging these topics which I've thrown at you, which are complex at times, difficult to understand at times, and difficult to accept at times. Um, but it also opens up a whole new world um, that can be dark and dangerous, but also beautiful and compelling. It's also an invitation for a revised opinion. So if you take the Bible as an artifact, right? Not in the linguistic sense, so that there among your assumptions are assumptions that are drawn from the Bible, right? Let's say that homosexuality is bad, which is in the Bible. Um, if you understand the Bible the way we have understood it here, that's an invitation for you to rethink that position, right? Whether that statement on homosexuality is culturally conditioned to the place and time and people involved, or is it absolute? Is it for us here and now? There are many, many, many things like that, of course. The Bible is oral and origin. And by the way, the artwork here is really cool. I just did a search and curated a search on contemporary art that deals with biblical themes, and I found some really terrific stuff, especially this Grace Carol Bomer. I love her work. That's the sacrifice of Isaac. All right, so that the Bible begins in orality is, as you know, the most important fact about the Bible that I can think of, other than it doesn't exist. But the reason it doesn't exist is because it is oral in nature. Um, it still stuns me that people talking about the Bible do not consider that it was born in orality, and the stories come from a completely different way of thinking that we explored. Um, this orality explains much of its strangeness. So, whenever whenever I read an ancient text in my youth, whether it was the Bible or something else, I was just put off by the strangeness of it. There were elements, formulas, devices at work in the text that just put me off. They were strange. They were not um, literary in my rudimentary understanding of what that meant. And so I just thought, well, this is strange. Now I had a compulsion, a religious compulsion to keep going, but for I think many people without that compulsion, um, they just go, well, what is this? I don't want to know anymore because it's too weird. But if you understand that it was born in orality, then it can come alive and you can see a different set of linguistic conventions and stylistic conventions at work there. And it brings the text to life, as I say here. Frankly, it also diminishes dumb interpretations. And I guess a good example is the homosexuality example, or anything, any biblical interpretation that assumes that the text is acontextual, that is, without context. And if you look at some of the most egregious, or it doesn't even have to be egregious, some of the most basic statements about the Bible, the underlying assumption is that, well, sometimes it's that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, and that leads to some really stupid statements, um, flying in the face of science and logic, etc. Um, but it also just it it assumes something about the Bible that's not true. That it was that you can take it from an oral context and apply it in a literate context. That you can take it from ages ago and apply it to the present. You can do that, of course, and it's done most of the time, nearly all the time. But what is lost when you do that? An intelligent, literate understanding of the Bible. Now, I want to say too that understanding the Bible is born in orality can actually add, like I just said, really to literate interpretation. So we're in a literate society. I think we're actually moving into a video society, a cinematic society, since that's the way we receive most information now is through video. Still, understanding orality does not need to diminish literate interpretations. So, for example, we saw the documentary Hypothesis with JEDMP. We saw the synoptic problem in the New Testament with Q and the saying source, etc. Those are interesting, but they're more interesting if you understand that these are literate concerns, which were not the concerns of the speakers. That just adds another dimension and some depth to your understanding. The Hebrew Bible is unique. Look at that piece on Lilith. Isn't that great? That artistic piece. Well, it means that you have respect for the culture that created the text and the stories and continue to live by them, right? It still amazes me the the treatment Jews get by Christians and others, where they just plow over the fact that the Hebrew Bible is not the Old Testament and it is unique in itself. And it's, as I've said in those lectures, it's there's nothing quite like it in sacred literature where you embody an argument with God in the text and you keep it going, right? Absolutely fascinating and unique, and it reveals a new hermeneutic. Remember, hermeneutic is what you believe before you read and and how you enact those beliefs in your reading. Jewish hermeneutics, completely different in Christian hermeneutics. If you see the Hebrew Bible as unique, you see that. It reveals a unique theology as well. Now, the the Hebrew Bible does not have a heaven or hell. Uh, it and it, like I said, it promotes arguing with God. It actually doesn't even have monotheism. That comes later. So, for example, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, you see that Yahweh is not the only God. He's just the most powerful and highest of the gods. There's a scene in Exodus where Aaron, Moses's partner, has a magic contest with some Egyptian magicians, and Aaron wins, but the Egyptian magicians do magic. So it's actually called henotheism, from the Greek word for one, uh, or highest, I think, meaning that Yahweh is not the only God; He's just the most powerful God, and that's what the contest was about: who was the most powerful. And so, accordingly, it reveals a unique understanding of God. And you see, I've written God the way Jewish people write it in English. I remember the first time I saw this, I was at Emory University as a doctoral student, and the student turned in a paper like this, a Jewish student. And I kept marking it as a typo, and then it kept happening. And I'm like, oh, this is the English equivalent of not saying Yahweh, which is a prohibition for Jews not to say the divine name of God, which is another fascinating aspect of Judaism, is you center absence and not knowing in the center of your religion. Um, can't speak the word of God, can't really know God, right? That's the book of Job. Fascinating. Well, the New Testament is unique too. And if you have biblical literacy, you can appreciate the New Testament as separate from the quote Old Testament unquote. The New Testament is I guess dependent on the Hebrew Bible, but it has its own life and vision. And some of the New Testament writers draw upon that Hebrew antecedent, but they don't have to. I'm trying to think. Look, some of the letters of Paul, which constitute the bulk of the New Testament, aren't necessarily engaging in the Hebrew Bible. They're not connecting this new religion to the Hebrew Bible. Now, most of the time they do, and for their own reasons, because that new religion, that new Jewish sect, is in the New Testament. That's a snapshot of that new Jewish sect emerging as a separate religion. But the New Testament can be appreciated without understanding it as a fulfillment of the Old. Reveals unique uses of genres. So the New Testament does something new in the pardon me in the ancient world, and that is create a new genre called gospel. There's nothing quite like it. Part biography, part religious um, sermon, almost religious proclamation. It's the good news, right? Gospel means good news. Very interesting. And then if you see the New Testament standing on its own, apart from its apart from certain interpretations of it in relation to the Hebrew Bible, you get rounded characters and events instead of flat theology. So what I'm talking about is you see the New Testament, if you read the New Testament, if your hermeneutic of the New Testament is seeing it as superseding the Old Testament, you're going to miss a lot. You're going to catch a lot because that's certainly there, but you're also going to miss a lot. And a lot of unique New Testament characters and events. And in fact, this issue of the relationship of the Hebrew Bible to the New Testament and the new emerging religion was actually one of the most dramatic scenes in the New Testament is when Paul and Barnabas go to Jerusalem. Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, and his friend Barnabas go to Jerusalem to meet with Peter and James about whether or not Christians in the new religion or the new sect need to be circumcised. And guess what? We get two different versions. We get Paul's version where he goes in and just tells everybody what's happening and, commands the space and reaches a conclusion. You get, the Acts version, the Luke Acts version is a little bit different. It's more equal, and there's an analog here to Joshua and Judges in the Hebrew Bible, where in Joshua, the invasion of the land of Canaan, it's highly militaristic. It's very nationalistic, and the Hebrews always win. I think they win everything. They suffer some losses, and Joshua was a general. He was a military person. But if you read the book of Judges, about the same thing. The Hebrews walk in quietly, and they have a few skirmishes, and they get hurt a lot. And the transition is anything but easy. The Bible is political. What does this mean? Again, there's probably three things about the Bible: that it doesn't exist, that it was born in orality, and that what you have in the Bible is the result of a political strategy. If people understood those three things, we'd be so much better off in our understanding of the Bible. So the Bible exists as it is, and perhaps at all, because a Roman emperor made Christianity the official religion of the empire. I don't think I'm overstating this, that without Constantine and his calculation, political calculation to make Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, I don't think we're even having this course. I don't think we're talking about Christianity. Maybe I'm overstating it, but I think there's a plausible, and you can't really confirm any of this because you're speculating, but it's entirely possible. What I'm saying is that it is entirely possible that without Constantine, this kind of craven Roman general who tells a great story about seeing a cross over a battlefield, but uses it for political expediency. Without him, I think the trajectory of Christianity is that it would have been extinguished. It had suffered for centuries under the Roman Empire. Even the great Marcus Aurelius, who's a wise and incredibly effective emperor, informed by Stoic philosophy, murdered Christians. They were just not well liked and not understood at all. It's entirely plausible that Christianity does not exist without this intervention, which was not really religious, it was political. So the Bible is political. The Bible you have in your hands, if you pick one up, is the product of theological, political, and social concerns. It did not drop from heaven as is. It was constructed. In fact, it is a product of a committee. In fact, a few committees. So you know what documents look like when they go through committee. What is that famous saying? A camel is a horse made by committee or something like that. You know what I'm talking about. Messages, when they go through the committee process, change dramatically. The Bible is that. The Bible is the product of a committee, a couple of committees, in fact. The Bible is religious. What does this mean? The Bible is the foundational text for religious institutions. specifically Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and their offshoots. And that's pretty powerful because with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you have the bulk, by far, not even close, of the world's religious adherents. By the way, Islam's going to overtake Christianity in a few years as the world's most popular religion. So it means when we say the Bible is religious, we mean it's institutionalized in religious organizations. So to do that, a particular biblical hermeneutic has to define the Bible for these institutions. And that hermeneutic is in flux, like everything in the world. But and so it changes with culture, but it also has a centripetal movement toward controlling that interpretation. So it was not long ago, and still is the fact in some churches that lesbian, gay, bisexual, LGBTQ people are not welcome in the church at all. And that's because of a particular biblical hermeneutic, right? And in the service of an institutional use of the Bible. Now, this is interesting. Attempts to control the Bible's interpretations create attempts to free it from that control. I'm looking at you, Martin Luther, where you released the Bible to the world and said, if you can read Latin, and eventually if you can read German, and eventually if you can read English, all you need is this Bible, sola scriptura, and the grace of God, sola gratia. And he immediately says, oh no, you also need your conscience. Of course, attempts to control created attempts to free it from that control. And now we have Protestantism, which is 37, I don't know how many there are, 37 different versions of Christianity. It also means that the Bible becomes an artifact. It levels up or down, however you want to look at it, so that the Bible does not become an a text open to interpretation. It is a text that must be controlled. And once it's controlled, that's how it becomes an artifact, because you've stopped the interpretive process. And so now now you can use it in a ceremony, a wedding ceremony, for example. All right. The Bible is literature. So important to me personally, but also I think to the world, the Bible reading world. Like all ancient literature, the Bible begins in orality. I don't know, you're probably sick of me saying that now. Like all ancient literature, it uses literary forms. It uses the forms of the time. And so it's not uncommon, remember, for pseudepigrapha to occur, that is, false writings, that is, writings using the names of people who are known to your readers. It would be like if I wrote a novel and called myself Stephen King. We have laws against that now, but that was not the concern in oral cultures, this notion of a text and its ownership. It was a story, and the story was meant to be shared, and you can say, I heard this from Enoch, right? Completely different. But the Bible emerges, pardon me, the Bible emerges in the forms of the time. And with Homer and his two epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Bible is the foundation for Western literature. The way we interpret all literature is informed by the way we interpret the Bible. So, for example, if you're looking for deep meaning, that comes from biblical hermeneutics. Um, like deep meaning, like meaning of life stuff, that comes from biblical hermeneutics, which is designed to get you to God, right? Um, if you if you see a text as a complete whole, that comes from biblical hermeneutics, where um, this is in here and it's in here for a reason. The author must have intended it. Well, and that goes to who's the ultimate author. In Western culture, the ultimate author is God, for the Bible, but also for all literature. Not named so much usually as God, but named as the sublime or beauty or even truth. Those are all synonyms in the literary sense for God. Later writers incorporate the Bible into their forms and intentions. And so the Bible has some poetry. The New Testament does not have any poetry except excerpts, but the Hebrew Bible does. But when poets like Dante, Milton, Blake, when novelists like Toni Morrison, and when contemporary writers like Louise Erdrich incorporate the Bible, they do so in their forms. And so the best example of that I have is that Christ's Twin poem, where Louise Erdrich puts the story of Jesus, the New Testament story, into her twins mythology. And of course, that means, once again, that the medium is the meaning. And we saw that the Bible shapes art. So, as our lecturer Satya Indra told us, the canonical Western art is biblical art, and such biblical art is define the hermeneutics of art. You can see a lot of parallels here with art and literature. So again, the meaning of art is a sacred meaning, and so of course you would incorporate the Bible. But biblical imagery really became art during the Renaissance, and that's an important period um, for the resurgence of literature, especially Homer and the Greek and and Roman Latin classics. And likewise, as it is in literature, the art is primary, the biblical imagery is secondary. All right, so some neglected questions that I want to take a stab at answering here in conclusion. Look at that piece. I love that piece from Brazil. Why are most people biblically illiterate? Oh, wow. Well, I won't speak for the rest of the world, but I can say that in the United States, we actually have a history of anti-intellectualism that is driven by religion. There's a deep suspicion of intellectual pursuit because it undermines religious belief. So ignorance in America is often seen as a virtue in favor of simple statements of belief. Well, that would make understanding the Bible especially problematic, right? I remember in my first job when I was required to teach the Bible to incoming freshmen. And I told everybody this was a terrible idea, but this is where it really hit the road, is I was teaching biblical literacy. They thought I was teaching biblical belief. And it was a conflict we worked through, but with some difficulty. Um, should the Bible be read more and how? Absolutely. I don't know why you would ignore one of the foundational texts of your own culture, much less global culture, given the missionary activities of the first century and beyond. Another reason is just good. There's some really good literature in the Bible. I've already mentioned the book of Job. I think the book of Genesis, the first three chapters in particular, are still our foundation myth. We just don't acknowledge as such. So it should be read. Um, and if it's not read, it makes you vulnerable to con men and people trying to sell you something. How? Honestly, I'd start teaching the Bible in middle school, if in my world. But I would teach it as a scholarly literary text. Um, I, Perhaps naively, I believe that can be done. And I think it would change the world, frankly, if we taught students at a young age what this text is, how it came to be, everything we discussed here. How can the Bible be reinterpreted effectively, and how? Right. Well, I think we've demonstrated that in the course, and it's nothing earth-shattering. It's simply treating it like a text. If I am reading a text from first century Rome, like Ovid's Metamorphoses or Virgil's Aeneid, I want to know the circumstances that led to the creation of that text. I want to know the author and his intentions and aims and strategies for use in the text. I want to know the characters and what they symbolize and mean and how I relate to them. In other words, I want to treat it like literature because it is. And it's also much easier, frankly, to do it that way than to layer on these theological and institutional concerns. Can non believers read the Bible for meaning? Oh, yeah, often better than believers. Because when you're in an emic insider hermeneutic, you're limiting yourself. That's what you're doing. And there are advantages to that because you don't have to worry about, the edict concerns from outside the text. But non believers do not have that problem. They can read it as a literary text. And often to great effect. Mark Twain, for example, was really good at this. Um, what's that book he did? There's something called Letters from Eden. I forget. I'm sorry, I can't pull it up, but it's like Eve's diary. He creates Eve's diary, and she talks about this strange man who lives in this garden with her. Well, that's brilliant, right? It's a brilliant non-believing way to illuminate and elevate the text, even. Finally, what is the future of the Bible? I don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows, but I don't think it can continue as it is. Um, One future might be that the Bible gets rediscovered. Um, and when it's rediscovered, it'll be that, nobody's ever said this stuff before, when in fact, it's always been there. This understanding of the Bible as a book of books, has always been there. But this is the nature of rediscovery, is we have to pretend that this person, in particular, we usually center it on a person these days, has done this amazing thing. And another feature of the Bible is just the opposite, is that it disappears from cultural consciousness. Churches Christian churches are dying. Um, this is just numbers across the world. Uh, there does seem to be growth in Christianity in Africa and Asia, but yeah, I don't know. I shouldn't say because I don't know. But one possible future is that the Bible just disappears, in the sense that I don't mean that it'll be, you know, banned or anything like that. Although anytime you go banning books, the Bible should be top at the top of the list for its violence and um, egregious bigotry. Um, but yeah, it's possible it just becomes, well, like the Iliad and the Odyssey. Who reads that anymore, right? A few people, and a few people to great effect. I think that could be a viable feature of the Bible, is it just becomes this kind of odd artifact on your shelf, your physical or virtual shelf, and it's already an artifact, right? That's its primary use, whether it's the materiality of the text or the linguistic reality of the text. It's used as an artifact. It's not read. Um, yeah, there may be obviously there's the future that does happen. It's hard to predict because we're in a global liminality right now. We're in between. And we like to say that about everything because everything's always changing, but there are changes that are profound and deep, world changing times. And we're in the middle of that here in 2022. So it's hard to say what the future of anything is. What's the future of democracy? Honestly, don't know. Um, what's the future of the Bible? I don't know. But what I do know is that we don't know anything about it, most of us in this country and around the world, and we should. Thank you for your attention.